Today I'm going to make a really simple snowboard rack. This rack will hold 5 snowboards. You'll need 1 2x4x8 and 4 1.125" by 4 foot long dowels. I'll get started by cutting the 2x4 in half and then pulling from the new cut, measure and mark at 46 inches, and then cut both 2x4s at that measurement. Next, I'll run the 2x4s through the table saw and the thickness planer to square up the edges and clean up the surface. This is totally optional. You don't have to do this, but it definitely makes the rack look a little bit nicer. Now I'm going to measure and mark for the 1.125" holes that I'll need to drill for the dowels. I want the dowels to be 8.5 inches apart, and you can find all of these measurements and a material list on my website. The 2x4s measure just about 1.5 inches, maybe a little bit lighter since I ran them through the thickness planer. And I don't want to drill all the way through the 2x4s, so I've set the stop on the drill press so I drill the holes at 1.25 inches deep. Now I've got a 1/2 inch Forstner bit in the drill press and I'm drilling countersink holes for mounting the racks. I'm using a chamfer bit in the router to put a nicer edge on the 2x4s, and it's always a good idea to run the router over the end grain first. That way if you have any tear out, you should be able to clean it up when you run the router with the grain. Now I'm going to cut the 1.125" dowels to length, and I need 10 at 13 inches, so I'll set up a stop block on the miter saw so I only need to measure once. To attach the dowels to the 2x4, simply put a little glue in the hole. You don't want to squeeze it into the bottom of the hole. It's better to take a paintbrush and put the glue on the sides of the hole. This is something I didn't really plan on, but it turns out that there's a hole in the back of the rack, and so I decided to use an 1 5/8" screw and help secure the dowel that way also. It just gives it a little added strength and keeps the dowel in position while the glue is setting up. It's always a good idea to clean up any of the glue squeeze out while the glue is still wet. It's just so much easier than trying to sand it. For finish, I'm using water-based polyurethane. Water-based poly dries really quickly. I'll apply 2 coats, sanding lightly in between coats. I'm installing the rack on a cinder block wall, so I'll need a hammer drill, a masonry drill bit, and I'll have to pre-drill into the cinder block, and then I'll have to use a special Tapcon screw. This is specific for working with masonry. If I were hanging the rack on a stud wall, I would use 3-inch long deck screws. I like to first attach the screw at the top of the rack, and then use the level to make sure that the rack is nice and plumb, and then attach the screw to the center of the rack, and then finally the screw at the bottom. Okay, and that's about it. Now the only thing left to do is to put the boards on the rack. And I'm really happy with the way this turned out. It's always nice to get organized. As you can see, I also have a surfboard rack. This was built pretty much the same way, and I do have a project video on my channel. If you want to check that out, I will have a link in the description. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please give it a thumbs up. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you next time.